Hi, it's Dr. Jan, and today I want to talk to you about toxicity, why it's important to differentiate between the different levels of toxicity in our workplaces. And at the end, I want to talk to you about the seriousness of toxicity and some of the things that are happening in our workplace. And so, what we use these terms interchangeably: toxicity, workplace bullying, discrimination, harassment. But let's start off with kind of our basic definition of what toxicity is. And I'm just going to read it for you. I hope that's okay. And so, according to dictionary.com, toxicity means the quality of being very harmful, unpleasant, pervasive, and of course, one of them is even poisonous, right? So, when we take that definition and we apply it to workplaces or our work cultures, okay, what it really means is that there's something that's happening in our organizations, okay, and I refer to the toxicity to happening into our organizational cultures that is harmful, okay, and if you use that term poisonous, okay, meaning that it's pretty harmful, it's pretty unpleasant, and if you look at poison, sometimes those things can infect what it is that we're doing, okay? And so there are all different levels of toxicity. Okay, so all levels of toxicity are not the same. And really, when you think of toxic workplaces, okay, they're on kind of a spectrum, if you want to use that term, meaning that you can have some toxicity that happens, okay, and it goes from kind of least harmful toxicity to most harmful, which of course is workplace bullying and harassment and discrimination in the workplace, okay? Those are all, again, toxicity is kind of that umbrella term, okay? And workplace bullying and discrimination and harassment are all underneath that, okay? And it's important to differentiate between the different types of toxicity, okay, in our workplaces, because when we look at kind of the characteristics of toxicity, it can help explain how toxic, how unpleasant, and how harmful the workplace that you're in actually is. Okay, so if we look way across on that spectrum, okay, discrimination and harassment, those are illegal. Okay, there are actually laws in place to there are consequences if you engage in racism or sexism or sexual harassment in the workplace, okay? And so that's extreme toxicity, okay? Workplace bullying, I also believe, is extreme toxicity, but it's legal, okay? So discrimination and harassment are illegal, meaning that there are laws, federal laws, and laws in all the states to, again, to be able to give consequences if somebody in your organization crosses that line of toxicity. So discrimination and harassment are in fact toxic, okay, but they're illegal forms of toxicity. Okay. Workplace bullying, on the other hand, is legal except in Puerto Rico, okay, which recently passed some legislation to protect workers from workplace bullying, okay? And so that's important to understand that some forms of toxicity are illegal and some are perfectly legal for you to do, okay? However, what happens in these organizations are very, very similar, okay? And again, toxicity and to the extreme toxicities of discrimination, harassment, and workplace bullying, those happen over time, okay? But a lot of times, again, the characteristics of the organizational cultures that cultivate harassment and discrimination are very similar to those organizational cultures that support workplace bullying, okay? Because they're not healthy organizations, okay? And yes, organizations that are healthy tend to be able to recognize, respond, and weed out toxicity before it becomes poisonous and extremely harmful and unpleasant. Okay. But I want to talk to you about the characteristics that are very similar in most toxic environments. Okay. And again, depending on the level of toxicity, depends on how dysfunctional and problematic these characteristics can be. Okay. So the first thing that happens in an organizational culture where there's toxicity, and in most organizations where there's extreme toxicity, like workplace bullying and harassment and discrimination, is there's no accountability. Okay. And what I mean by accountability is that there's no one in charge, leadership, yeah, that's right, leadership, holding people accountable to a standard. Okay, so now let's parse that out and separate that out between discrimination and harassment and workplace bullying. Okay, so because discrimination and harassment are illegal, okay, organizations and businesses are required to have procedures and policies in place to address those issues, okay? It doesn't mean that they're good policies, that they're effective policies, but every place that I've worked have had some policies in relationship to sexual harassment, discrimination, ageism, and etc. Okay, because they're required by federal law to do that, okay? With workplace bullying, I've never worked at a place that had a policy or any procedures in regarding consequences or what happens if you engage in workplace bullying, because it's legal. They're not required to do it. Okay. Both of those forms of toxicity are extremely difficult to prove. Okay. And that's because there's almost zero accountability. Okay. And when we look at accountability is layered. There's accountability from the top down, but there's also collegial accountability or lack thereof. Okay. So let's talk about leadership accountability. Okay. In my opinion, okay, it's very rare that leadership doesn't know that something's happening. Because most of the time, if you have these things happen to you, like workplace bullying, you've told somebody and you've gone up the chain of command. Why? Because you're desperate to get those things to stop. Nobody wants to be abused at work. I hate to break it to you. And it's painful and it's difficult to work in those environments. And we have a misconception that somebody cares about what's happening to us. Okay. And so in most of the situations, people know what's going on. Okay. That's leadership from the top. Okay. And they choose to ignore it and they don't take it seriously. That's common. Okay. And secondly, everybody else knows what's going on. So this is where this idea of collegial accountability comes in. Okay. So for example, I've been bullied. Of course, you know that. That's what I'm here to talk about, is that extreme toxicity. Okay. But what really allowed that to happen were people who watched it happen. Okay. Who sat with their head down. Okay. Because they felt ashamed. Okay. So there are a lot of commonalities of feelings of shame and guilt that bystanders have because they're not getting involved because they're scared. There's a culture of fear. That's why people don't have collegial accountability. But everybody knows it's happening. Okay. And so there's that accountability, and nobody's talking about it and nobody's doing anything about it. That's common for all types of toxicity, that there's an awareness from leadership all the way down that the environment or the culture is not healthy. It's toxic, whether that's discrimination and harassment, racism or sexism, ageism, etc., or workplace bullying. Okay. So another common characteristic is everybody knows what's happening. Okay. It's very, very rare that people don't know what's going on. Okay, which brings me to my next component, which is kind of this idea of silence is the best way. Okay, so people don't speak up because they're afraid of the consequences for them to either experience similar toxicity or bullying behaviors, or to be excluded from the group. Okay. And if you've listened to me before, I've talked about the idea of groupthink. These toxic cultures all have the component of groupthink, in which people act as a unit. So if you think of that silence, which is why people don't speak up, that's part of groupthink. Nobody is saying anything, and everybody wants to be part of that group, partially because they're scared, partially because they're worried about the consequences, but partially because they also don't want to be the whistleblower. Okay. And in most cases, the victims of these events and these cultures have tried to get people to intervene and to stop the behavior. Okay. So, and when they've done that, nobody has intervened and stopped it, and therefore there's no accountability. And even if there are policies and procedures, like there often are for harassment and discrimination, those policies are not applied effectively, because what we have is this idea that whoever is being targeted or victimized has a lack of credibility. So if we look at gender in the workplace, okay, across the board, I'm a woman, I have less credibility than my male counterparts, okay? And we believe that women lie and make stuff up outside of the workplace, but those biases then come inside the workplace. And also, again, with that idea of groupthink, is this idea that the target, again, if it's discrimination or harassment or bullying, it doesn't make any difference. There is a culture that has been cultivated by the perpetrators of that violence, that the target is not credible. And they have gone out of their way to spread lies and rumors and gossip and, excuse my language, bull bleep, right, about the target in order to build themselves up as if they're more credible. And with the second goal, to belittle and demean the target of that discrimination, harassment, and bullying. Okay. So even if that person goes in and says, I'm being sexually harassed, okay, that person automatically is seen as being less credible, as being significantly more likely to lie than the perpetrator, even though everybody in the organization knows that person is a problem, okay? And that is that idea, again, of groupthink. It cultivates that culture of fear, and also that culture that the aggressor is actually more credible and better than the one that's being victimized. Over time, what happens is people become immune to what it is that they are seeing. Okay. So when I was in bully culture and new people would come in, they would have the shocked look the first few times that they saw their colleagues being bullied. But over time, they didn't have the deer in the headlights look, because they became immune to it the more exposure to the toxicity that they had. So the longer people and workers are in those organizations and environments, that becomes normal. They are immune to the sexual harassment, to the discrimination, to the racism, to the ageism, and it becomes normal, everyday work for them. Okay? Because they have been socialized into that kind of an environment. They've received consequences, severe consequences, if they tried to speak up. Okay? And if they didn't receive it themselves, they saw what happened to other people when they tried to speak up. But in these environments, Leadership knows what's happening, and so does everybody else. So what do we do in these toxic environments? I think first we have to acknowledge that here in the United States, at least, we have a lot of toxicity, from mild to extreme toxicity. And that's important. That acknowledgement is important. I listened to a podcaster who basically said that, some of the toxic environments that have recently come up in the news, that's a rarity. I think the reality is that it's happening. Even the extreme toxicities, bullying, harassment, and discrimination are happening at high rates here. And acknowledging, at least even considering the possibility of that, is really important. And we also need education. Leaders need education, and not just about workplace bullying and toxicity. Leaders are supposed to get training on harassment and discrimination. But that, again, just because you have education doesn't mean that you have the skills or ability to apply it. So I also think that, yes, education is important, but giving people the specifics, leadership skills, and also professional skills on how to carry those things out. Like, how do you hold people accountable? Okay, we talk about accountability. It's key to a healthy organization. It's key to stopping toxicity, but people don't know how to hold someone accountable. First off, a lot of people don't know how to hold themselves accountable. There's not collegial accountability, and there's certainly not leadership accountability. So I think we have to decide. Every organization has the ability to be healthy. You have to know what it takes to have a healthy organizational culture, and you have to cultivate it. And I think that is the biggest flaw that organizations make, is somehow we think that a healthy foundation is just going to happen, okay? And that somehow people have, that people can just make a healthy organization. A healthy organization takes time and commitment and management. Okay, so you have to understand the pillars of a healthy environment, and then you have to understand how to cultivate and put those pillars in place. And so in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be talking about those, what it takes to have a healthy organization. And so hopefully that will be beneficial to you. But we have serious problems here in the United States when it comes to toxicity. Mild levels, but we have extreme toxicity. And we have to help people feel confident in order to break those cultures of silence, and not just the people who are victimized, okay? We need to have people who are watching it also know how to intervene and intervene appropriately. So for really for us to heal from our organizational dysfunction, or dare I say toxicity, we have to be able to recognize, we have to be able to respond, and we also have to be able to recover from toxic and bully cultures. Thank you so much. Please like, subscribe, and share. And I would love to hear from you. If you want to email me at jan@stopbullyculture.com, I would love to hear from you. Thank you.